Call it out.
Yeah.
Which ones?
Sure, fine. Afghanistan would be a good example.
That's a country, not a culture.
Well, of course, the culture that comes from Afghanistan. We can talk about the Muslim culture that comes from the Middle Eastern countries. I would argue that those aren't particularly equal. I mean, we see a lot of
the whole Muslim culture of what, over 1 billion, well, actually nearly 2 billion people.
I didn't say the whole Muslim culture.
Well, you said Muslim.
Something about this one right here that I need you to pay attention to before we get into the substance. The person making the argument that immigration without assimilation is invasion is the daughter of a man who was expelled from Uganda by a dictator, taken in as a refugee by the United Kingdom, and then immigrated again to the United States. That is not background context. That is the entire debate in one family's history. And watching Priya Patel spend 16 minutes trying to argue her way around that fact, while simultaneously calling Muslim culture inferior on international television, is one of the most revealing things you will watch this week. This is Piers Morgan Uncensored, Priya Patel, conservative influencer with 30 million views on a 6-second clip, versus Brian Shapiro, host of Pushing the Limits. And Piers Morgan doing something he does not always do, which is actually press the guest until the soft language gives way to the hard position underneath it. We're going to talk about what assimilation actually demands. We are going to talk about the irony that is not just ironic, but structurally devastating to her entire argument. We are going to talk about what happens when you follow the not all cultures are equal logic to its conclusion on live television. And we are going to talk about who is in the audience cheering the loudest for this message and what that tells you about what the message is actually for. Subscribe right now because this one goes places, and let us get into it.
Overused, but there's no question it applies to Priya Patel, the conservative influencer whose video on immigration has been viewed 30 million times this week so far.
This is your friendly reminder that immigration without assimilation is invasion. Got it?
Well, the problem with viral clips, of course, is that you never know if the 6-second sensation can back up their hubris on the big stage. So we thought we'd put it to the test with an uncensored debate. Joining me now are Priya Patel, the aforementioned conservative influencer, and Brian Shapiro, host of Pushing the Limits. So first of all, Brian Shapiro, this got a huge kickback, this very short video. It's gone hugely viral, obviously. The main sort of issue that people have had with this is that Priya Patel is basically lecturing people about immigration in the United States, but is called Priya Patel and therefore presumably has a heritage which might be in conflict with the statement. What's your view of this?
Well, first of all, Piers, good to be back with you. Good to see you. Yeah, you're right. This video certainly went viral. My issue is look at all the white nationalists that were commenting, and she knows this, on her social media pages. That's what's concerning to me, the hatred and the white nationalists that are commenting there. That would be issue number one. Issue number two for me, listen, I have no problem with people coming to this country, learning the language, and taking some classes and learning the history of America and culture. I have no problem with that at all. But what I want in this country, and I think what most people want in this country, is diversity as well. Now, we can go back to her family. I don't know a lot about her family, but in my opinion, a lot of her views and a lot of the stuff that she talks about would lead to her never being born in this country to begin with. And I think that's where she's getting some of the pushback. Listen, I don't support any racism. I don't support some of the hateful comments that she's received. But like I said, there's a lot of comments on her social media and a lot of white nationalists. That's very concerning to me, Piers, and I have a serious problem with that. And that's not culture of America, and that's where my issue lies here.
Okay. Well, Priya Patel, you're the woman of the moment this week. This has gone massively viral. First of all, are you surprised by how much pickup this has had, this clip?
To be honest, I am surprised with the amount of attention that it's gotten, but not surprised altogether, because I've had a viral video that hit on a very similar point prior to this. It didn't go nearly as viral, so of course that is shocking. But yes, I understand that it is a very provocative statement coming from somebody named Priya Patel. However, of course, these people have no idea about my family history and my background.
Right, which is perfectly fair enough. So let's just clear that up, because I think that's obviously key to the whole debate, because you were born in the United States, is that right?
Yes.
Right, but where were your parents from? Are they from the United States or somewhere else?
My mother is from the United States. My father immigrated here as a young boy, and from England, actually, not from India.
Okay, so he's English? Yeah, he's English, your father, or?
He was born in Uganda, immigrated to England when he was about 3 years old after the dictator Idi Amin chased out all of the Indians out of Uganda, and waited their turn to be able to come to the United States, and did so when he was in his teenage years.
So you say all the Indians. So is your father part Indian, or what's his background?
My father is full Indian.
He's full Indian. So your father's Indian. Your mother is American, or is she? What is she? What's her ethnicity?
American, yes.
And what's her ethnicity?
On my mother's side, I have ancestry date. Mixed European. She's a half German, quarter English, and then the rest is mixed European. But aside from that, I mean, I have ancestry on my mother's side of her family dating back to the 1700s in the United States. So
okay, so I'm only just trying to clarify, because as you know, there's been a lot of speculation. Not much is known about your family, but a lot of people will say, so your father was an Indian who Indian immigrant from Uganda into the UK. You know, how does that sit with you saying what you said? This is your friendly reminder that immigration without assimilation is invasion. I mean, did your father invade the UK?
no, of course not. But you know, there is a personal duty on the part of immigrants to assimilate to the culture of the country that they are blessed enough to come to, especially when it comes to, of course, that sort of situation. But honestly, anybody that is blessed enough to come to the United States in particular.
I mean, Brian, look, that is an argument. People say, yeah, a lot of countries, the United States, the UK, others have had big issues with controlling immigration. And a lot of people say if you come to a country from another place and you refuse to assimilate in any way and want to just stay out of the society and culture that you've come into, that people shouldn't tolerate that. What's your view of that argument?
Completely disagree with that. And in my personal opinion, I think in a way it's a bigoted view. You can come to this country and you could learn about our culture. I have no problem with that. But that doesn't mean you have to abide by our cultures and what we do. The thing that makes America great is our diversity and the fact that there are all sorts of different cultures, people with different backgrounds that live in the United States of America. That's the way it should be. The idea that people should be forced after they come to this country to do exactly what American U.S. citizens tell them to do is absolutely absurd and ridiculous. In this country, we have freedoms. And when you become a naturalized citizen, and if you come into this country the right way, you should be allowed to do whatever you want as far as your culture is concerned, your religion is concerned. And for somebody to say, you must do this or you must do that, that's against everything the United States of America stands for. And I wish she would at least admit that in this debate.
Okay, well, do you admit that, Priya?
No, I don't admit that. You know, we have cultures and norms that we have a duty to uphold as a society, and I think that you know, it should be enforced to some degree. And whether it's on a societal or a governmental level, I guess that's up for us to eventually decide, but it has to be implemented some way or another.
Well, everybody has to abide by the same... Well,
culture...
look, to be clear, everyone has to abide by the laws of the country that they're living in. Right, so that's just a given in somewhere like the United States or UK. So we can all agree that, because that's obviously a fact. But when it comes to cultural differences, in a country of 340 million people, there are obviously myriad cultures, ethnicities, religious creeds, and so on in the United States. It's a real hot pot of people. Famously, it's how the United States was created. People came from all over the world. You know, I'm just curious what you mean by assimilation. What should these people all be doing in a uniform way?
Well, I would disagree with the statement, Piers, that America was built on the fact that people came from all over the world. No, it was a very, very select few group of people that came here to the United States and built it. Of course, since then, we've welcomed a good chunk of the entire world to come to our country, which I would argue is, yes. You said that it was built on the idea that people were coming from all over the world.
Well,
but aside
the whole
from the fact,
premise
I'm sure
of the United States of
agree.
America is that people have come from everywhere. Right, that's been the glorious selling point of the United States, is it's open to all. You've got to come in legally, and that's been a contentious issue. But once you get there, I'm not sure. As Brian says, why should you feel compelled to abide by a specific culture? I mean, what is the specific American culture, for example? How would you articulate it?
Why exactly? If you didn't want to assimilate to American culture and live as an American, why exactly would you leave the country that you came from to begin with if you're only going to bring your culture's customs and norms and implement them
Maybe
here
the same
and
reason your
completely
father left
disregard that of the
war-torn
American
Uganda.
people?
You know, maybe the same reason your father left war-torn Uganda.
Do you not understand that?
Sure, but
do you
if
not
they-
understand that there are people that are seeking asylum that want a better life for themselves and their families, that are afraid that they could even lose their lives? Do you understand how many people are seeking asylum and are in fear of their life? For you to make the statement
that is a
people
very
coming
small
into
percentage of people coming to the United
Okay,
States. Very,
but
very
you're
small
making us-
percentage. And the large majority of
you're
people
ma-
committing
I'm just saying
the
you're making
large
assumptions.
majority of people claiming asylum are actually economic migrants. They're not from war-torn countries or suffering
but
under
when you
political
said
persecution.
one of the other comments, Priya, you said, which did get a lot of attention, you said not all cultures are equal, and we shouldn't be importing the third world. So, what did you mean by the third world?
I mean, I think that's pretty evident. There are a large majority of countries that are still considered third world. They are not.
Well, which
they're not
ones?
privy to any of the.
Which ones would you say are third world?
I mean, you could take into account a lot of countries in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia.
Well, give me some
there are
names
plenty
of countries.
to come from this list.
Give me some names.
You could probably take in Uganda. For example, would actually probably be
Uganda's
considered
a
third world country.
country for you.
I would believe so. Yes.
Where else do you think is a third world country?
You know, there are parts of countries like Bangladesh and a great many others, but that's
would you
somewhat aside from
classify
the point.
India as a third world country?
I think there's been a lot of debate whether it is or not. There are certain parts of India that are, of course, very westernized and would probably be considered a first world country. However, I think there are a lot of parts of India that, yes, should be considered a third world country still today.
And what do you mean by third world? What does that mean?
I mean, we've had a lot of technological advances and societal advances that a lot of parts of the world have not managed to either keep up with or come to that at this point in time. But to think that people can come from these, for lack of better words, dated societies and just be placed in America and they just magically assimilate, especially when we bring them here en masse, I think that is a massive, massive issue because, of course, these people are not prepared for this. I think if we did it on a very small scale, that it could be successful. Of course, we've seen that plenty of times throughout.
And just to be clear, when you say not all cultures are equal, which cultures, in your view, are inferior?
I mean, quite a few, to be honest with you. I'm not going to sit here and call out people's specific cultures, however.
Well, which ones? Which cultures
I mean,
are
Why
inferior?
not? Call it out.
Yeah.
Which ones?
Sure, fine. Afghanistan would be a good example.
That's a country, not a culture.
Well, of course, the culture that comes from Afghanistan, we can talk about the Muslim culture that comes from the Middle Eastern countries. I would argue that those aren't particularly equal. I mean, we see a lot of...
So the whole Muslim culture of what,
political
over a billion, well, actually nearly 2 billion people.
I didn't say the whole Muslim culture.
Well, you said Muslim.
You just said it.
Correct. I said some of the Muslim cultures that we're seeing from the Middle East.
Well, just to be, I'm just trying to work out what you believe. So you think the Muslim culture is an inferior culture?
In a lot of ways, yes.
Wow.
It's just so ridiculous, Piers.
Okay.
This is so ridiculous.
Brian, I think we're getting to why this comment went viral, why both those comments went viral.
First of all, it's extremely offensive. I would ask her how many Muslim people does she know, number one. Number two, when you take an entire group of people,
quite a few, and they're actually very westernized.
I didn't interrupt you. I did not interrupt you. Please let me finish. When you take an entire group of people, when you take an entire group of people and say they are lesser than us, that is pure bigotry. And I'm not surprised.
Actually, I stated in that video my exact. You made an incorrect statement about my position.
You just thought Afghanistan was a culture, so don't talk to me about statements that people make that are not correct. Okay?
Countries have culture, Brian.
Piers, here's the issue we have here. Okay? And I'm going to instill politics into this. When you go on her social media page, she echoes a lot of similar things that MAGA Republicans echo, taking an entire group of people like the Laura Loomers of the world, saying they all should be deported, or in this case, taking all Muslims and saying they're inferior to Americans. She has a MAGA hat on her social media page.
Not what I said.
And what she does is she caters to MAGA Republicans in her base. It's why she gets all the views she gets. And I think it's extremely offensive, I'll say it once again, to take an entire group of people. That would be, how would you feel if somebody said everybody that is Indian is inferior to Americans? You would say that's racist. That's a terrible thing to say.
Well,
By the way,
hang on. Let me ask the question.
I would never say that.
Well, let me ask the question. Would you say that about Indians, Priya?
Of course, and I would not. Of course not. I would never say that about any race or group of people.
You literally
That's not
just
what
said
I
it about Muslims.
You just said it. You just said it about Muslims.
You couldn't have been clearer. I gave you the chance to clarify, and you clarified it.
And that's perfectly fine. Look, I do think America has a superior
you're
culture,
fine
and
to
I would
have
like
that
to
view, and it's
uphold
perfectly
that.
fine that we think it's a bigoted view and very hypocritical if you then
That's
say
fine.
that other vast countries like India are exempt from your bigotry because. Well, guess what? Your father happens to be Indian.
That's, of course, never what I said, Piers.
No, but people think you're a hypocrite.
You guys are both taking things completely out of context.
They say your father's an Indian, but here you are condemning all Muslims as somehow culturally inferior.
That's fine. I've been very critical. I've been very critical about Indian immigration to this country too. I'm not picking and choosing
But when you
one
say
group
that,
of
when you say
people,
that some cultures are less equal, you're a Christian. I understand. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
So
and if you would let me clarify exactly what I said.
As a fellow Christian, well, hang on. As a fellow Christian, I thought the teachings were quite clear that all men are created equally. Where does this sit with that?
Correct, Pearson. Did you watch? I don't know if either of you watched the entirety of that video where I was talking about culture. I specifically did state that all people are created equal under the eyes of God and the law, of course. However, we do have a society that we're supposed to uphold here in America, and like you, Pierce, in England, right? You don't want a lot of foreign invaders coming into your country and completely causing the collapse of your society and of your country. If people are blessed enough to come to America,
so would you,
out
of interest, to stop this invasion, as you put it, would you deport all foreigners from the United States?
No, I would not deport all foreigners from the United States. I would certainly deport all of the illegal foreigners that are here in the United States.
What about those that just didn't sign up to your worldview of what the culture should be?
No, I don't necessarily think that they should all be deported from the United States, but I think we do need a very slow and if not a halt on immigration as a whole currently, so that we can, as a society and allow our government to continue to help these people assimilate to our culture, actually fix our immigration system so that it works with our country, so that we can keep it in.
Let us start with the family history, because it is not a gotcha and it is not a distraction. It is the core of the entire argument, and it needs to be treated that way. Priya Patel's father was born in Uganda. He was expelled as a child when Idi Amin drove out the Indian population in one of the most brutal acts of ethnic cleansing in post-colonial African history. He was taken in by the United Kingdom as a refugee at age 3. He waited his turn and immigrated to the United States as a teenager. He built a life. He had a daughter who was born American. And that daughter is now on international television saying immigration without assimilation is invasion and calling for a halt on immigration, and describing Uganda as a third world country with a dated society whose people are not prepared for America. Let that circle close completely before we move on. Priya's response to the contradiction is that her father assimilated, that he did his duty, that he played by the rules. And that is where the argument reveals its deepest flaw. Because the assimilation standard she is applying is entirely retroactive. Gets applied to immigrants who have already succeeded and whose children are now citizens. Her father gets to be a success story because he made it, and his daughter turned out to be a conservative influencer who supports the current political movement. But the people arriving now are from dated societies and are not prepared, and are coming in such numbers that assimilation is impossible. The standard is not actually about behaviour, it is about outcomes. And the outcomes get judged by people who are already inside looking out. The Muslim culture, his inferior moment, is the one that defines this entire interview, and it needs to be examined with the precision it deserves. Piers asks which cultures Priya considers inferior. She gives Afghanistan as an example. Piers correctly points out that Afghanistan is a country, not a culture. She pivots to Muslim culture from Middle Eastern countries. Piers presses, do you think Muslim culture is inferior? She says in a lot of ways, yes. And Brian Shapiro says what needs to be said. That is pure bigotry. Full stop. Here is why the bigotry label is not an overreaction and is not a rhetorical move. Nearly 2 billion people on Earth identify as Muslim. They live in Indonesia and Malaysia and Turkey and Bosnia and Senegal and the United States and the United Kingdom and every country on Earth. They speak hundreds of languages. They practice Islam across an enormous spectrum of traditions and interpretations. They are doctors and engineers and artists and farmers and soldiers and teachers and parents. Saying Muslim culture is inferior in a lot of ways is not a policy position. It is not a nuanced critique of specific practices in specific contexts. It is a blanket judgment of inferiority applied to 2 billion human beings based on their religious identity. That is the definition of bigotry, and calling it anything else is doing the people on the receiving end of it a disservice. Brian makes the comparison that lands hardest. How would Priya feel if someone said Indian culture is inferior to American culture? She says she would never say that. Brian points out that she just said it about Muslims. And the distinction she is drawing, that Indian culture gets a pass because her father is Indian, but Muslim culture is not a principled distinction. It is a personal carve-out. It is the same logic that allows every form of ethnic and religious hierarchy to function. My people are the exception. Your people are the category. The assimilation argument itself deserves a serious examination, because underneath the bigotry there is a policy question that is worth engaging with. Honestly, what does assimilation actually mean? Priya says immigrants have a personal duty to adopt American norms and cultures. But when Piers asks her to define what specific American culture everyone should be assimilating to, she cannot give a coherent answer. And that is because there is no single American culture. There never has been. America is a country of 340 million people whose ancestors came from every corner of the earth at every point in history. The culture of rural Alabama, and the culture of New York City, and the culture of the Navajo Nation, and the culture of Little Havana in Miami, and the culture of Chinatown in San Francisco are all American cultures. They coexist. They interact. They change each other. That is not a bug in the American system. That is the American system. Brian is right that what makes America genuinely exceptional in the history of nations is precisely this capacity to absorb people from everywhere and build something new from the combination. The Italian Americans who came in the early 20th century were told they were not assimilating. The Irish were told the same thing. The Chinese were told the same thing with actual laws passed to enforce it. The Jewish immigrants fleeing European persecution were told the same thing. Every generation of newcomers gets accused of refusing to assimilate by the generation whose own parents were accused of the same thing. And every generation eventually becomes American in the specific way that America works, which is not by abandoning where they came from, but by adding it to what America already is. The viral clip strategy is the other thing that needs to be named directly. Brian points out that Priya's social media is full of comments from white nationalists who are enthusiastically amplifying her message. She knows this. 6 seconds of immigration without assimilation is invasion gets 30 million views, not because 30 million people carefully evaluated the policy argument and found it persuasive. It gets 30 million views because it gives people who already believe immigrants are invaders a brown face to point to as proof that the position is not racist. That is the function, not the argument. The function. The people running that play know exactly what they are doing, even if the person delivering the line genuinely believes what she is saying. Piers ends by pointing out that, as a Christian, Priya's own stated belief is that all people are created equal under the eyes of God. And she agrees with that. And then in the same breath maintains that Muslim culture is inferior in a lot of ways. The contradiction is not subtle. You cannot hold both those positions simultaneously in any internally consistent way. Either all people are created equal, in which case no culture that those people produce is inherently inferior, or some cultures are inferior, in which case the people who produce them are not really equal in any meaningful sense. Priya wants to live in both places at once, and the interview makes clear that she cannot. Here is the bottom line. The immigration debate in America is a real debate with real stakes and real complexity. Border management is a legitimate policy question. The pace of immigration and the resources available to support integration are legitimate questions. The difference between asylum seekers and economic migrants is a legitimate distinction worth examining. None of that requires you to call Muslim culture inferior. None of that requires you to describe Uganda as a dated society whose people are not prepared for America. None of that requires you to deploy the word invasion while your own family story is a testament to exactly the kind of immigration you are now arguing against. Priya Patel's father was expelled by a dictator and given refuge by 2 countries that could have turned him away. He waited. He came legally. He built something. His daughter stands as a product of that generosity. And she is on television arguing that the door her father walked through should be closed, not because the arguments for closing it are sound, but because closing it plays well to an audience that would have looked at her father and seen exactly what she is now telling them to fear. That is not a policy position. That is a betrayal of the story that made her possible. And it deserves to be named as such. Stay locked in. Stay critical. Stay in this fight. I am Lucas Stoey, and I will see you in the next one.